Within the vast universe, there spins a small planet, home to a human family of diverse cultures and belief systems, differences that too often have led to dangerous conflicts. But within these diverse belief systems, there are common threads, common values, that can be the basis for peace and prosperity among nations. Food for Thought Productions is pleased to present Ms. Diane Tillman, the International Coordinator for Content in the Living Values educational program that is currently being taught worldwide under the auspices of UNESCO. Here is Ms. Tillman with our producer, Lee Baker.
Now, where did the idea come for living values, and how did you arrive at the values that you chose as the basis?
That concept wasn't actually mine. The project really had its roots in a project called Global Cooperation for a Better World, which went into 129 countries and asked people of all religions, almost all cultures, from 4 years old to 90 years old, what they would like in the world, what would be a peaceful world. Mm-hmm. And they essentially came up with the same ideas. Peace within, harmony in relationships, peace in the world, a clean environment. And so down the road, there was a project where hundreds of thousands of people were asked what 12 values would make the world the way we want it to be. And so that's where I was given those 12 values and asked to write values activities for them. But like, for example, coming up with, when I was asked to come up with values activities for humility, I thought, right. I didn't have a clue. I really had to think for quite a long time. Mm-hmm. I think peace is essential today, and certainly respect between everyone on our planet, but yes, also between students in the classroom, students outside the classroom, mm-hmm. parents, teachers, and students, and just in our whole world. So there's many values that are so important. But after those 12 values were chosen, and there was this little tiny 7 pages in this book, mm-hmm. the senior advisor of UNICEF saw those 7 pages, read them, and said, the world needs more of this. So 20 educators from all over the world were invited to the UNICEF headquarters in New York. We took a look at the needs of kids around the world, and I was asked to write, and the result several years later is.
And then you developed all of these books from preschool, and a guidebook for mentors, and the whole range.
From preschool through university, a training book, a book for facilitators of parent groups, yeah. Mm-hmm. But I had help from friends and from educators around the world. Also sent me activities after a couple of years too, mm-hmm. so that was wonderful.
So what is the procedure? In other words, when you start working with the children, what do you do? How are these values presented? Are they handed down the way everything else is handed down in our schools, or how does that work?
Actually, not quite. I think in the USA we have a wonderful child participatory, more child-centered system, which is not so much around the world. But around the world we have found that in general, moral education or character education or values development isn't going very well, because the old approaches of just telling and moralizing doesn't work. So these activities are very participatory, very child-friendly, and there's a wide variety of activities.
But how are they introduced to the set of values in the first place? Do you tell them these are the values, or what?
No, it's different for different ages, but in a couple of the ages we actually start with them thinking about what a better world would be, and talking about peace and whether it's important, and whether they think it's important.
And what it would take to mm-hmm. have peace.
So we actually begin by asking them what they want, because we want them to draw from inside. Mm-hmm. Can we really put something in the box if the box isn't open? So first, to have them create from inside and think about what they would want the world to be like. That's usually a starting point, to get them involved. And then it's artistic
Then it's
expression.
their idea. It becomes their idea. It becomes their values.
You want them to own it.
I see.
Absolutely.
So anyway, you have this list: cooperation, happiness, honesty, humility, peace, unity, responsibility, simplicity, respect, love, freedom, and tolerance. So what's not to like?
Really, I think they're rather universal.
And so, all right, and when you bring up the concepts, do you go through all the values, or when you bring up one idea, do you do an activity around that? How does that work?
In the books, it's suggested that the teachers just follow through the book. So we start with a value of peace. And in the 3 to 7 and the 8-14, there's actually 20-some lessons on peace. So it's creating it, it's imagining it, it's artistic expression, it's conflict resolution, it's skill building, it's learning cognitive skills of thinking and contrasting. There's stories, there's activities, there's games. And then we go into respect. Then usually into love, and then the other ones. But peace is important first, because kids care far more about peace than we as adults imagine.
And so then the rest of the values sort of tie into that value of peace.
In a way.
In order to have peace, you really need all of the others.
Certainly it's enhanced.
Yeah.
For example, when we do conflict resolution, we do that first in peace. But then when we get to respect, conflict resolution is done again, but the children add the value of respect to the process. When we get to the value of love, you're actually teaching cognitive skills of looking at the initial antecedents. So when did this problem initially start? Who can think of an act of words or a behavior right here with the value of love that would have stopped the problem?
Now, you mentioned UNESCO. What is that? That's an acronym for what? UNESCO?
UNESCO means the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization.
And what part do they play in this project?
We're actually becoming more involved with them. A few years ago, they sent us a letter just saying that they really supported the concept of the project. And part of the reason for that is UNESCO is one of the main educational bodies in the world that promote tolerance and promote a culture of peace.
So basically, they promote these values. This fits in.
They really want to see that. So in some developing countries,
Because the goal is peace.
Yes.
For all of this education.
Yes.
Right. Right. Now, tell me about the mechanics. How is it actually carried out? You mentioned to me there were many different countries that have these programs. How does that work?
There's actually living values activities being implemented in over 4,000 sites in 67 countries. Some of the sites are just one teacher doing it with 10 kids. Other sites are like schools or schools, or there's even a refugee camp where 3,000 children are doing it. So the sites can really vary. But how it works is within each country, there's a Living Values Educational Program coordinator. And so it's very different. Sometimes they work from the top down. More often it's grassroots level with individual teachers and schools becoming involved.
Is the coordinator a native to the country? Yes. So
almost all the time, yes.
Mostly, and so then they work with your organization.
Yes.
To bring it in a form that is best for their country. Is that it?
Yes.
For their nation. And what about the financing? Where does that come from?
Actually, it's a rather interesting question. Right now, we do have some money coming into the program, but with the royalties of the books. But it's been often individual educators volunteering their time.
So it's possible with volunteers.
Yes, we have a lot of people volunteering, and then like in some countries, for example, like UNESCO in Cambodia, they funded the training, they funded the translation. The Mauritius Institute of Education in Mauritius funded a training. So it's different partners.
Are these books translated to all of these other languages? Or some of them at least?
There is ongoing translation right now in 24 languages. And for example, in China, the 3.7 and the 8.14 are translated. In, in different countries it's different. In Korean, there's several books, like the young adults book is just being finished next week in the Korean language. So yes, some languages have all the books already done. In Hungarian, they've done the 3.7 as well. So it's different for different languages.
So this is a work in process.
Absolutely.
And so are you, because you're still writing more books, is that right?
Yes.
And it just keeps growing.
Right now, I'm just fascinated with the project in terms of the writing, because I'm writing activities for street children. Street children, the first book just got completed in January, and that was for street children ages 3 to 7, because in South Africa, there are children as young as 3 on the street. We'll be doing our first street educator training in Vietnam in the latter part of September, and then hopefully in South Africa or Brazil in the spring.
Now, do you go to these different countries and supervise or participate, or do you just mostly provide the materials, the books?
In the last 5 years, Lee, I've actually traveled 6 months a year. So, yes, I've just been all over the place. Like from last March through November, I went to El Salvador to do a training with children affected by earthquakes, and then to Cambodia and Thailand to do trainings for refugees and for children affected by war. Then went on to Lebanon, Nigeria, England, New York, Miami, the Netherlands Antilles, Trinidad, Argentina, and then back to Thailand. So, yeah, when I travel, I'm training.
You're training the local people to do this work?
Either local educators, sometimes I do, sometimes I do a UNESCO seminar. For example, we did one in Beirut and one in Paris with their wonderful cooperation. They've been really terrific. And sometimes with educators, like we did a little tiny one in Huntington Beach just a few weeks ago.
I was going to ask you about in this country, how much of this is going on in this country?
In our country, something isn't real until it's published. So it's really just picking up steam right now. But there are many teachers, and the Miami-Dade School District, for instance, in Florida, is very interested in the program. And they've just had 100 teachers trained. There's a seminar that was done in New York, and more is being planned as well. And I occasionally receive emails from educators in our country, Pennsylvania, Texas, Utah, for example, recently, asking for the musical tapes that go with the 3 to 7, because there's songs that go in that. So it's growing in the USA.
Well, how do you disseminate information about this project?
Word of mouth, website.
Oh, I see.
The website receives about 100,000 hits a month. So people do find out about the program.
So that goes worldwide?
Oh, yes.
That goes worldwide?
Yeah.
Some of these enrichment programs, additives to curricula in this country, get a lot of resistance. It seems that there's this total focus on reading and arithmetic. Have you encountered some of that?
Yes, I think in many countries around the world that's the case. I think that sometimes we need to look beyond test scores and realize that children learn more when they're feeling safe and respected and valued. When there isn't so much tension or fear, children learn better. When you have someone standing over you, you don't learn so well. So part of this program is developing really a passion for learning and helping kids build their self-esteem,
Right.
helping them be enthusiastic about the process of education. There is some interesting research going on right now in England, and because in England the academic scores of the boys were dropping and the girls were rising. And in this one school that was doing values education, what they found is the academic scores of the boys were rising. And the principal, the headmaster of that school, his hypothesis is it was because of the values program, because what you're doing is in part is developing reflective learning skills. There's many types of ways to learn, but when you allow the child to talk about things that are real for them, and you really help them have more confidence, you can also then teach the cognitive skills that make it easier for them to really apply themselves.
But what you're doing is really engaging them more in the process.
Yes.
In other words, you're inviting them to participate in the discussion of the material, right?
Absolutely. They're asked, how would you show respect in your family, for example? How do you show respect to the environment? They do projects, they create murals. There is information shared, but there's many skills to practice that.
Because there are different kinds of intelligence and ways of expressing oneself. And when you give them an opportunity to do a mural or make a drawing or involve them in a discussion where their ideas are listened to and respected, then all of a sudden learning becomes pretty exciting for them.
And when you teach them, they make a difference. And
Exactly. That they can make a difference. And they feel empowered and believe they can make a difference when you have that kind of experience.
In the young adult book, one of the exercises after several values units, of course, once you have it a lot more peaceful in the school, is to create a culture of appreciation in the school. There's others where kids actually set goals for themselves and then they keep a journal and look at whether their thoughts are positive or whether they're discouraging thoughts. So many of the skills work with the child to help them become empowered, if you like, to help them achieve what they'd really like to achieve.
And what they're capable of. It's very democratic, really. It's because I think too much of what we have now is in learning is dictatorial, where they're handed some information which they're to accept non-critically and hand back on a test.
And is that good preparation for life, not to develop critical thinking skills?
Exactly, and it certainly doesn't work if you want to have a democracy.
We also have students look at consequences. So if they're, are they truly applying the value, and what are the consequences of that value? And so then they have to entertain the larger world, the real world. We also work on exercises to develop awareness of social justice.
Now, how early does this kind of education begin? When do you begin working with children in this way?
Right now, with the books, we start as young as 3, but actually in the facilitator guide for Living Values Parents groups, you can do it when they're newborns.
Newborns.
Because really, with the development of the brain in the child, a lot of what happens before a child is 3 is they don't associate an event with the feeling. So a lot of the just generalized behaviors around them create almost a feeling tone. So the more peaceful the parents are, the more they dialogue with love and respect, the more that is sort of absorbed by the child.
Right, because they learn by copying. Children learn by copying. And so you do a lot of training of the adult population.
Yes.
So that the mentors and the parents and the teachers are able to learn a lot while you're training them to teach the children, right?
Absolutely. The values activities are one part of the program. The whole other part of the program is the creation of what we call a values-based atmosphere. So we look at how can we have discipline and order without fear, without punishment. How can we have that order with respect? And so we actually train skills. We have the educators look at their own values and recognize that they're teaching values, whether they like it or not. Just
Whether
by
they're
their way
aware
of
of it or
whether they're
not.
aware of it or not.
Right.
But then we look at what kind of atmosphere do you want to create, and we look at active listening, effective encouragement, discipline with order but without fear, and how to do that, practical methods.
You know, there's a technique of reflective listening. I got this in a psychology course. But it's something that is really useful for anyone to do. And what it is about is that when you give someone your total attention and they are listened to, you reflect back generally what you believe that you have heard. And then they can correct it if they want to. So that kind of an interchange is something that is just so so satisfying to the person. You know, it's as though how important I am. This person's giving me their full attention, and they're really hearing what I'm saying. You know, so that's something that when you have these kinds of discussions with little children, they get used to being heard, and then they can listen in turn. So it's just a fabulous thing. You know, sometimes we have these talk shows in this country where they solve problems, and they solve problems with couples in marriages. And one that I just heard was about the idea of communication, which is the #1 problem in marriages. Well, it's the #1 problem in general. And so they go through all of this stuff about and find out one of the partners in the marriage feels so disheartened, they don't believe they are being heard.
And if you're not being heard, you're not feeling respected.
And you're not being respected.
It's said that listening to a child is one of 3 major ways to truly build self-esteem, real self-esteem. But yes, active listening is a wonderful skill, but it's especially useful for children who feel negative, for children who are angry, because if you cannot meet their anger with anger, but encounter them, but letting them know you hear, it's very interesting. The anger just falls, and you can go to what's underneath, and then you can work with that.
And deal with that.
And deal with it, yeah.
With what's underneath. In other words, they need to have this anger acknowledged before you can go to the underlying level.
Just in the process of listening, what happens is that as there's the acceptance of another person, then they can drop that and go down to what's underneath, because anger is never primary, it's secondary. And so
What's the primary?
hurt,
Beneath hurt.
hurt, fear, shame, being unsafe.
And the person who's angry wants to be strong, and by being strong, being aggressive,
Yeah, trying to defend,
it's not
protect
solving
the
their
self.
problem. Does not solve their problem.
Flame and flame make a bigger fire, and it's not beneficial for the people involved. And I think it's a real tragedy what's happening if you look at some of the children or even people that have done violence, even in our own country. Very often they're looking at bullying that was going on beforehand, the child not feeling respected, the child trying to prove the self, with incredibly tragic consequences.
Right.
But I think the creation of a values-based atmosphere, I mean, the results of the program are fascinating. In the refugee camp, the levels of violence have gone down incredibly, just absolutely in amazing ways. But in our regular schools, they also talk about the increase of respect and caring between students, between teachers and
By
students.
having this process, experiencing this.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm just so thrilled that you were able to explain this, and I hope that we can do much more of that in this country. We certainly need it.
Thank you, Lee. We have a wonderful
So
country.
thank
I
you
hope
so
too.
much for sharing all of this with us.
For more information about the Living Values educational program, contact www.livingvalues.net. We need to educate our children and ourselves to live together in peace by inculcating values cherished and aspired to the world over. It's only in this way that we can fulfill the promise in the American Declaration of Independence for all peoples of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
We hope you have found this program intellectually stimulating and that you will continue to investigate the ideas raised here. To connect with other like-minded individuals, please contact any of the dozens of free thought organizations, such as the American Humanist Association, American Atheists, the Center for Inquiry, and Atheists United. You may also email the producer directly via leebaker27@gmail.com. This program has been distributed through the courtesy of Atheists United.